Hello. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer by background, and I have spent a number of years practicing law in the financial sector in London. And I've been in the blockchain space for a number of years now, focusing on providing legal guidance to blockchain industry on how to stay compliant and how to navigate legal and regulatory frameworks, something that is becoming more of a challenge recently.
Hi everyone, I'm Cathy Yoon. I'm Chief Legal Officer at MPCH Labs, and we are focusing on a number of different use cases utilizing multi-party computation. Our first product, which we hope will launch in the next few weeks, is called Fraction, and it is an MPC key management system. So it's an institutional product, but we're hoping to be able to support a whole slew of digital assets, from crypto to NFTs to gaming assets. That's our big plan. I have been in this space for, it feels like forever at this point, and I've previously worked with trading platforms. I've worked on the digital security side of things, primary issuances of securities, and I will hopefully be able to tell you why I hate the term real-world assets during this panel.
Hello? Hello? Yes, it is. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Shan. I'm the COO. Oh, thank you. I have one fan. I'm the COO of Dexalot. Dexalot is a relatively new DEX with an order book. We just launched on a subnet. I think we were one of the first, if not the first, DeFi project on a subnet. Prior to joining Dexalot, I spent 25 years on Wall Street, working primarily for hedge funds and PE funds. I wore many, many hats, from global head of operations to chief risk officer, chief compliance officer, and my last role was CEO of a global macro fund.
Thanks, Tim. So when you tokenize everything, so how do you tokenize everything? Michael, we all know that we can create SPVs and we can create securities that trade, and we can make them digital. But outside the space of securities, how do you tokenize something, and what do you need to think about?
Right. It's a great question, Diego. So for me, I actually started off in the securitization space 20 years ago, packaging like credit derivatives and CDOs. So to me, I think I have a good sense of the value that tokenization offers. Because back in the day when I was at JP Morgan, for us to do an SPV, the deal size had to be at least $100 million. Because the cost of creating this company in the Cayman Islands, hiring the administrator, getting all the legal work done, it would, for us to justify the cost entailed and the people entailed, we would need a large company to justify the effort. But today, anyone can push a button on the computer and launch a token, get it traded on Uniswap, and it's actually doing the same job of taking something that's private and making it publicly tradable and accessible to the rest of the market. So to me, that's really the value. It's like anyone can encapsulate value in an instrument and make it available to people. But obviously, there's lots of legal challenges, and there's lots of economic challenges in making this thing truly something that is valuable. But I think the possibilities are actually limitless, because I think you can tokenize any type of scarce commodity. So for example, in our token model, the scarce commodity is really the ability to change this open source code base everyone uses. So the folks who are trading on DYDX may want that supported better. The folks who are trading on Dexalot may need that, that supported better. So there's a tension in terms of where that work is allocated. And so that, we believe, is a scarce commodity. And if we can inject that into a box, which is called a token, then hopefully it will serve its purpose of allowing people to actually govern the project.
And that was a scarce commodity from a particular governance token. Surely on the real world assets you can create, you need to find some sort of commodity or something that you want to tokenize. And what do you give the investors in that context?
Right. Well, so we just gave our token away because it's a governance token. I don't really know, but to me, when I say it's limitless, what I mean is more like I think there's many things in the world that it's like something the group cares about that might have value in a tokenization engine. So it could be like volatility. You know, if there's a way to tokenize volatility, maybe people in the market can now use that instrument to actually, make a bet on volatility, control volatility, hedge, whatever. Maybe you can tokenize culture. That's what NFTs are basically trying to do. So I think to me, what I'm excited about is more like seeing the creativity of what people can do.
Okay, that makes sense. And so if we go through the life cycles, we've talked about what you would do in order to create the asset. We're looking for that tokenized value that we're injecting. Agatha, do you want to talk us through some of the challenges that may arise when you're actually tokenizing and settling something, and how that pans out when you don't have a digital thing that you're injecting, but maybe gold or cargo or whatever else that lives in people need to actually use physically?
So we have to understand that with these DLT frameworks, you are creating this unified trading space in which practically unlimited number of different kinds of rights and assets can trade seamlessly, globally, and in this unified and recognized form of a token. So that in itself creates a huge challenge to our current legal and regulatory approaches, because right now we have these different silos in which different assets are subject to different legal and regulatory regimes. So for example, real estate has its own dedicated, usually legal regime, which dictates how real estate can be traded, how such transfer can be perfected, and provides legal certainty to participants in such transaction. Now, on these DLT frameworks, on the networks, you can suddenly trade everything at the same time and across the board, across the borders. So you have assets, you have tokens that can represent just about anything. And now the challenge is to provide legal certainty to participants in that network to ensure that when they actually buy or sell a certain token that represents a certain right or assets, there is actually legal certainty as to the finality and as to the ownership of what such token represents. So that is not only a matter of regulatory frameworks that are currently being produced, like MiCA, for example. That's a matter of bridging the physical world with the digital world. How do you make sure that the physical world is synchronized with the digital world? How do you make sure that when you transfer a token that represents a certain right, the actual underlying, let's say, commodity or right, whatever it is, follows that transfer? How do you make sure that participants in this transaction can actually enforce their rights, not only against each other, but also across different jurisdictions? So we are seeing each country has its own legal system. Those systems are usually quite fragmented, not connected with each other. If we just overlay on top of that fragmented legal and regulatory frameworks, this unified transactional space in which all these different tokens just flow seamlessly, then there is a huge challenge, not only making sure that the physical traditional world is synchronized, but also making sure that there is a legal certainty for all participants in these transactions, that they actually buy properly those rights, that those rights are secured, and the underlying assets, for example, real estate or painting or something of that sort, is actually also secured and is actually something that someone is somewhere securing, and we can actually, as buyers, have the right to it at the end of the day. So it's a little bit of a matter of synchronizing the innovation with legal frameworks, existing legal frameworks, of bridging the traditional world with the new digital world. And let's not forget that the token itself is a new thing for many legal frameworks. It's not deeply embedded in legal frameworks, if at all, even though the token represents something that already exists, like real estate, like a commodity. So there's a lot of different challenges there that we have to face to make sure that it works for everybody and there is a legal certainty for participants.
Right. I mean, but I also think that, we started off by saying that anyone can set a computer and tokenize something, right? And now we're talking about what happens when you tokenize something and you're able to trade things and you have all these different regulatory concerns. But even before that, let's take a step even before that, right? Just because you can tokenize everything, should you tokenize everything, right? No.
Or can you prevent it?
Right, or you can't prevent it. It's just, a lot of naysayers and critics of this space say, what is the value when any Joe Schmo off the street can go and create like Cathy token, right? And then kind of just sell it and do something. What is the value? And I think what we really need to think about is, why would you tokenize something to begin with? Why do it? Who are you trying to like attract and appeal? And okay, that didn't like me. So I think even before we talk about the challenges of trading, it would make sense for us to spend a few moments to talk about why would we want to tokenize in the first place. I don't want people to think that it's the future of every single physical or intangible asset that's out there. It might not be appropriate. And so I think when people think about, let's create a token, let's tokenize something, take a step back and ask, like, who is your audience? Who is your target? Is this meant to only trade? Is it only for speculation? Or are you going to do something much more with it than just trade with it, right? And so I think when you think about the reasons why you want to tokenize something and who you're trying to attract, all of the other issues that come along with it in terms of which regulatory framework, how it's going to be treated, it becomes a lot easier. But if you're just tokenizing something for the sake of like having something cool and tokenizing it, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, along the lines of what you were talking about, from my perspective, I think very few people really think carefully about who they think very carefully about who's going to buy it, right? But in order to have a market, right, you also have to think about who's going to sell it, right? And continuously, right? And most people, especially new projects, don't think about the sellers, right? They only think about, well, I'm creating this cool thing, I'm sure everyone wants to buy it, right? But that's not necessarily true. Because you're creating something that's going to last for a while, right? And in the beginning of especially new projects with new tokens, a lot of people are thinking about who they're going to sell to, right? But then, now what? Okay, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, who's going to be trading? Who's going to be on the buy side and sell side? And that's something that a lot of projects don't think about, right? They just assume that I have a token, I'm going to put it onto an exchange, and it's just going to trade like it's BTC, but it's not going to be, right?
So I think what we're saying is that there's plenty to think about before you even take this step. I think, we saw it in the first point. What's the tokenomics of the particular thing that you're doing? What's the legal framework? What are you trying to solve when you're tokenizing? Is there friction or whatever that you want to get rid of? Is it worth tokenizing? And then how do you distribute your token? Can we dig into that operational piece a little bit more, maybe? Cathy, would you be able to explain some of the operational considerations when you've put an asset or when you've tokenized something? How does it actually work in real life? What is the operational aspect?
Well, I think there was a panel earlier today that talked about, does the nature of the asset matter, right? Yes, it matters very, very much. You can take something as simple as, maybe not simple, but let's take art, right? And if you want to tokenize it, that's great. Are you tokenizing the entire thing? What aspect are you tokenizing? And then, there are all these different, are you tokenizing the entire thing? Are you allowing for fractional ownership? what are you trying to do with it? And I think people don't, for all of like the lawyers in private practice, I'm sorry to say this, like you can save yourselves a lot of money if you think about these things before you go to a law firm and to talk about this, right? Just kind of dig deep in terms of identifying the asset. What are you going to do with it? Are going to be specific rights associated with it? Are you going to do something different than just ownership of something? Do you want it to trade in an exchange? Or do you want it to be more of a collectible or a commodity where it's only meant to be held by one person? And so I think from an operational perspective, those are the things that you have to think about before you even start thinking of the legal and regulatory framework.
I'm actually going to disagree with that, if you don't mind. But
yeah.
So taking a holistic market lens, like a token is really a computer program that fits a certain standard, right? So anyone can create an ERC20 token or a 721 token or 155.8 or whatever it is. You can just, push a button on your computer and launch it. And I think people should be able to do whatever they want without thinking about anything. And a good example is this Pepe coin that's, trading right now. It's probably some kid who, on a lark, created a meme, launched a coin, and boom, it's blowing up. And I think it's the availability of that, that is kind of like what allows for innovation. Because is Pepe, worth trading? Who knows? But people are trading it, and because it literally does nothing, I think there isn't a lot of risk in listing the token.
I think many of these questions and dilemmas are not so new to the digital space alone, because it applies to our traditional everyday decisions as well. Is something worth creating? Who's going to buy my goods or services? Sometimes it's a win, sometimes it's a fail. So these are the same considerations. What I think is wonderful about the space is, first of all, such a diversity and flexibility that it gives to the creators. So as you say, it can be literally anything, and it can be, represent a little or a lot or fractional and so on. And the easiness that you mentioned, the permissionless aspect of it, everybody can do it. There is no, like before you were saying, there has to be a huge company to securitize something. Now it's available to everyone. So the important thing is to make sure that those things can actually be, the legal and regulatory frameworks support that innovation and empower those participants, and there is a legal certainty for them, whatever they do. If it's useful or if it's less useful, if it's trading or if it's just for personal use, that they have legal certainty that what they do is actually enforceable and recognized by legal systems.
So just on those 2 points, because I thought this was sort of an interesting dynamic versus Cathy's, because I think, if you have a meme coin, you are tokenizing, but what are you tokenizing? So you're effectively sort of tokenizing nothing? Is that the right approach, the right way of thinking about it? Or do you still think that there is a scarce commodity that you were talking about in the beginning?
Right. I think there's actually, I think it goes to the definition of what a meme is. Honestly, I'm Gen X, so I don't really know what a meme is, but it seems to be something that is a thing, right? And I think, like people tokenized, I think a good example are the NFTs where they tokenize some meme that happened 10 years ago, like that kid that, yelled or something. And I think what they're really tokenizing there is originality, because there's many copies, the copies of stuff, but there's value in being the primacy, being the first one that did it. And I think if I own that, it's kind of the same thing as like owning the original art, some original painting that's been copied many times. But I think on a broader question, I would say, to answer your question, I would say that the memeability of Pepe, honestly, I don't know what people are getting out of it. But I think the fact that it is being traded a lot, and if you look at past examples like Shiba Inu and Dogecoin, I do think it's occupying a space in this industry that will persist.
Okay, but is that a bubble? Is that just a thing that's going to go with the trend? Or is there an actual value? Because the investor has no rights. If we go back to what Agata was saying, you need to identify the rights of the investor. There is no rights. There isn't, you've got the benefit of holding the asset. Great.
Right. I think there's actually a lot of, there's not a lot of assets that trade in finance, which is not clear what the right is. So for example, there's actually a bunch of commodities that trade that, they do represent the commodity, but it's like, does the price actually, is it linked to the actual physical quantity? Who knows? So I think that, I guess like, I'm a jaded finance person, so I think people trade because something has value.
Right.
But it's not just about the trading either. And I think, one of the beauty of like tokenization is you're able to take something, and one of the earliest like DeFi like use cases, right, is that you are able to tokenize something, lock it up into a smart contract, and use it as collateral to be able to do something else with it, right? And so maybe all of a sudden you have this very illiquid, obscure asset, but someone else shares your view on ascribing that asset with some sort of value, where they are going to enter into this contract with you on a DEX to be able to do something. And all of a sudden you're taking things where you have some value, but you're able to get something else out of it and do more with it. And I think that's like one of the beauties of tokenization. That's something that's, for me, one of like the greatest things of decentralized, protocols and platforms out there, because you're now thinking and creating a whole, it's not even a marketplace, right? It's being able to find commonality in an obscure asset and still being able to find value that you can do things outside of that asset.
That's really interesting, because I think when you start then thinking about, you've got all of these tokens that may or may not represent things. Tim, from your perspective, from a DEX perspective, does it matter? Like when you put an asset on the DEX, what do you think about? Is that a concern? Is it just about liquidity?
I would love everything to be tokenized and trading on Dexalot, okay? And bottom line, from a technical point of view, it's simple to do, right? But as I explained earlier, I mean, aside from all the regulatory, operational, all that stuff, it's really about a market. What is the market? Who are the buyers and sellers? Do you need market makers, right? A lot of people come to us, they want to list, fine. And then I sort of ask them who's going to be the market maker, because you need a market maker. And their next question is usually, what's a market maker, right? And a market maker is essentially someone who is paid or assigned the responsibility of ensuring a stable market for the token or asset that's being traded. So they're there to buy when there are a lot of sellers. They're there to sell when there are a lot of buyers, right? So the concept has been around for a long, long time. There are a lot of market makers in traditional finance, and there are a number of market makers in crypto. So from my perspective, I just want to make sure that we're listing or we're setting expectations appropriately with new projects or tokens, making sure that they understand that it's not automatic, right? A lot of projects that have been listing generally in crypto, a lot of small projects, they become shitcoins for a reason, right? Because there isn't a big market, a demand for it. It's not deep market. So those are many things to think about. But we try our best at Dexalot to educate folks about that.
And do we think that the likelihood of something becoming a shitcoin or not is linked to, is it really just the depth of the market and there being somebody who drives that market? Or is it tied to the underlying value? Is it really, it's less likely to be a shitcoin if you're putting, something valuable behind it that lots of people recognize easily?
Yeah, so I think to me, to be honest, I actually hate the word shitcoin because it kind of allows people to bucket the world in two categories, like valuable and not valuable. But if you look at the traditional finance world, penny stocks trade all the time. There's tiny startups. I mean, honestly, all those would be shitcoins if I'm, JP Morgan, I look at the world. But the reality is, and I think this is like kind of, as a founder, I love the fact that tokens give people empowerment because, you know, our community is filled with people from emerging markets, so we contact people from like small countries like Iran or Turkey or the Philippines who are trying to create their own tokens. And I think that ability was just not possible in the pre-token world.
Cool. We've got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask one question to the panelists, which is, where do we think we're heading? Are we heading to a world where everything is going to be tokenized, or not so much because law and regulation is going to stand in between and sort of is creating too many barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first, but the simple question is, I think so, yes, because as a student of financial history, what I see is that there's an increasing amount of technology being applied to how instruments are created. So, you know, if you just look at like the currency system, you know, we went from kind of like hard asset-backed currencies to fiat currencies with the Bretton Woods system, with free floating currencies, and now we have, you know, currencies that can be in any ecosystem, completely digital on the blockchain. And so I think when you look at the pace of like financial, you know, history, I think there's a clear trend toward digitalization and decentralization.
Well, I think that it's a learning curve for everybody, including lawyers and regulators. So law has traditionally always lagged behind innovation. That gap is probably bigger now because the innovation is going at such a rapid pace. So sooner or later, you know, law will follow that innovation, solutions will be found, and new solutions for this digital world of this type will be found as well. I think that the education and awareness level will also rise. This technology will help microeconomies, help capture value in smaller communities, will surely bring a lot of benefit. As to when will that happen, that's very difficult to say, and what the obstacle and barriers will be along the way, and surely lack of those ready regulatory solutions might be one of them, but probably not forever. So we are on that learning curve and in that learning process. And just one example, we are having so many regulatory panels in this summit this year, and this interest and demand for regulatory legal solutions is increasing. So the work will accelerate on providing those solutions, on bridging this physical traditional world with the new one, and maybe not everything will be tokenized straight away, but it surely will, that level of tokenization will increase.
I really hope everything is not tokenized. We already live in a world of digital representations, right? And that's great, and we accept it. Everything does not need to be tokenized. So I think if there's any takeaway, don't tokenize everything. But I think there are great ways and use cases where tokenization could be really powerful. And so yes, anyone can tokenize a meme or do something, and I think there's something great that you can do that. But I think that as participants in this space, we all have to be a little bit more responsible, right? And if we want this area to survive, if we want to be taken seriously and be legitimate, let's find other things to tokenize.
Wow, okay. I was going to say yes, but you made a really good point. So, I mean, look, I think from my perspective, eventually, but eventually could be a long time from now, I think that as we sort of move down the liquidity spectrum, so basically from the most liquid assets to the least liquid assets, that could be, you know, container ships or carbon credits and commodities and stuff like that. I think I'm very interested to see what the friction is. There's going to be a lot of friction. There's a lot of legacy systems and ecosystems that's going to be pushing back very hard because they're protecting their own economic interests. So I think it's TBD, but you know, the generations will start getting older, and the younger generations will become leaders of the future, and I think they're obviously more savvy with technology, and it shouldn't be a big deal. So eventually, I think we will get there. Sorry, Cathy, but anyways.
Thank you very much, all. We're out of time. Thank you.